So one more song. Right, Runaway Train Driver. Well, yeah, that's a good finish. Yeah, that's a fucking challenge. This is a song about a driver of a trainload of nuclear waste. But it's a very bad day, and just decides to go faster and faster. Thundering through the night with a moon in my eyes, down into the daybreak and a big sunrise. Our fan was blowing this in the crush of the crowd, and I'm bound for freedom now, and I'm power and speed and slowing down. I'm a runaway train driver.
You never felt that Tim was faking it. You always felt that his irritation was 24 karat. He does the 200 gigs a year, sometimes to 6 people. And every gig he does, he hits the ground running with this furious intensity that is totally overwhelming. He's an evangelist. He harks back to the troubadour tradition. He turns up at a town with his guitar, plugs it in, come one, come all, here are my songs. This is how the world is according to me.
TV was interesting. He had a kind of oblique approach to the way he wrote. He reminded me more of the way Elvis Costello approached a song, or Reckless Eric. These are the interesting writers, you know. Come at it like a poet. Also come at it from the unobvious, the anti-obvious angle.
Whether it's the lyrics, television's over, back from the dead. I've written a few songs in my time, and whenever I write lyrics, TV Smith hovers over my shoulder, just like, make it count.
I was born in Hornchurch, in the east suburbs of London. We then moved to Devon, and so I was basically brought up from the age of 8 in a tiny village in Devon. I think I was a very shy child. I would never have imagined when I was 10 years old that I would end up going on stage in front of hundreds of people. That was absolutely the furthest thing from my mind. I mean, I was much more poetry orientated when I was younger, and poetry is the safe place for a shy child who wants to express himself.
You've got me, girl, on the run around.
At some point when I was a teenager, I started listening to music and realising some of these musicians were using the same techniques as I was trying to do in poetry. And then apart from listening to records, one very other life-changing thing happened was that I went to see my first gigs. Individuals that hadn't bought into the pop music thing over everything else that was important. You were hearing a voice that was not a dumbed-down voice of the crowd, but someone who had something special to say. Although I did quite well at school, I didn't see where it was going for me. The only thing that really excited me was writing, and whether it was prose or songs. The further I got into my teenage years, the more that was my one obsession. There was still a kind of vestigial interest in art, and I did leave school and go to art college for a year, but almost as soon as I was there, I just dumped the coursework and started working on getting my band together and rehearsing and writing.
The band wasn't going for really very long. It was only like about 7 months or something, but we started doing gigs, and very early on we supported George Melly.
A lot of it was thematically copied from the Velvet Underground or from Bowie. It was kind of a lot of scattergun stuff that I didn't really know what it was about myself. It was just teenage angst coming out unformed, you know, and that's why I don't really think much of the stuff that I was putting out then. But somehow it was getting something out of me that was in there and I needed to get out.
I was in my 3rd year at graphic design and he was doing a foundation year. I knew his bass player, Bean, more, so I think Bean came round one night and brought Tim round. We
immediately, as soon as we met each other, we had something that clicked. I don't think you can pick that sort of thing apart. You know, when you're a teenage boyfriend and girlfriend, you know what you are and you know what you want, and somehow it just happens. Gaye wasn't playing an instrument at all when I met her, but she was a big music fan. The decision to form a band together stemmed out of the fact that we'd become partners.
He gave me a guitar and said, play this. He probably did the same thing with Gaye.
This is the G string, this is the A string. Like, I'm off.
So I was working in a sweet factory. I remember the first day I went in and seen some old geezer working there. I said, I'm only doing this as a temporary job till I get myself sorted out. And he said, that's what I said when I first came in. And that sent a real shiver down my spine. 4 months later, I was still there. And I didn't really have any prospect of getting out, really. And luckily, I was made redundant. And then I was really thrown out and really had to decide what's happening now. And that was really the point where it crystallised that Gaye and me were going to move to London. We were going to form this band. We weren't going to do these rubbish jobs. She was working in a factory as well. We were going to make something happen. It's an exciting moment in your life, you know. I started to read in the NME or Sounds or whatever it was back then about the Sex Pistols. They covered a few of their first gigs.
All around the country there's always these kind of quirky characters doing stuff. You know, you got Devoto and Shelley sat up there in Bolton. You know, these Stooges fans basically, like one or two in each city, just waiting for something to happen. There's suddenly this thing called the Sex Pistols. Everyone's going, what's this? There's a group here compared to the Stooges in London. And this is what we're thinking, trying to do ourselves. You know, like TV's doing his glam rock band, but in his head he's kind of gone a little bit further. There's a bit more psychotic glam rock. Very parallel to Shelley and Devoto up there in Bolton. You know, they're sat in the college room trying to put this band together. They can't play at all. They haven't got an idea what they're doing. And they read about the Pistols and go down to see the Pistols, and that's how they get going. And TV and Gaye moved to London because they knew that's where the action was. I mean, it's pretty amazing they did that, you know, 18, 19 years old. They basically just get on the train, go to London because they want to be part of the music scene. So that's what makes it interesting. Already from the start, TV is an outsider. It's outside the kind of punk elites, but he's one of the original punks in London going to these gigs.
I was living in a 2,000 inhabitants village in Devon, and I was coming up to London and seeing gigs that had more people in the audience than lived in my entire village. We were going out to see bands almost straight away, you know, seeing a few concerts by the Sex Pistols, and within months the 100 Club Punk Festival happened. There was a whole world opening up to us. We'd spend the first couple of months sort of settling in. Then when we felt Gaye was at a point where she knew the songs well enough that we could play them together, then we started looking for a guitarist. When Howard replied, there was a whole load of things about him that all seemed right. One was that he could play the stuff that I was showing him and it still sounded like the song that I'd written. One was that he lived just down the road. And the other was that he worked in a music shop that had a rehearsal centre behind it. So we were kind of in for cheap rehearsals as well.
And that's where I met Howard, actually, and the rest of the band, because they were rehearsing there, and actually Howard was the manager of the place. And I'd got myself a job there, so me and Howard were actually working in this place, and he'd just joined up with the band. And I'd actually just bought a drum kit from a friend of mine who also worked there, who was also a drummer.
I said, look, this is what you're going to do. Boom, 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 boom. And he tried, couldn't do it. I said, come on, you got to try and get this leg separate from your hand. And all he could do was... And if you know any of the early Adverts songs, one called Wonders...
Laurie was not a normal drummer. He had this kind of rigid but extremely fast style that was very unconventional. I didn't even know if I liked it, first of all, but there was no denying that his playing was something different from anything else that was going on.
I think that came about from not really knowing what I was doing.
So it was kind of knife's edge whether or not Laurie was going to be in the band or not. Well, I'm absolutely glad that he was, because it gave the records a very distinctive sound. We were the Adverts. We were a real band and we were ready to go. Well, I'd taken the lyrics and the chord changes to rehearsal. I'd have worked with Gaye. Her bass lines became almost like a counter to what the vocals were doing. The only problem for Gaye was that as soon as we started rehearsing with Laurie, the song sped up a great deal. With Howard, he pretty much played it as I wrote it, with some additional lead pieces, which I had no clue about. I mean, all the lead pieces in the first album, for example, they're all Howard's. And then with Laurie, I gave him absolutely no guidance whatsoever. I knew nothing about drums. And so it was basically, right, we got these songs, the three of us are playing them, this is what we do, what are you going to do? And what he did was he bashed out his version of the songs and sped everything up about twice as much as we'd been learning them. And that did mean I had to enunciate very precisely, I had to learn where to breathe, where to find space to breathe. That was the start of me really finding my voice as a percussive instrument as well. So the words start punching out. You know, they're not just an expression of what you're trying to say. The voice is also a rhythmic instrument and a percussive instrument. I don't think I'd ever really understood that in songwriting before. So we were all on a learning curve, for sure.
Well, the Roxy was a brainchild of Andy Tchaikovsky. He put out the word in Sniffing Glue, the fanzine that was going at the time. Just let me know that you can actually string two chords together and come down and play. I don't know how Tim approached Andy, but that was the first time I see the Adverts. I think I'd come across Tim and Gaye. Their faces were familiar, so when I saw them on stage, they weren't total strangers. They had a unique sound to them. Very, very amateurish, obviously, at that time, but so were the majority of the bands, you know. I introduced Tim to Jake, because I'd seen the Adverts. I said to Jake, come down and check out these guys. I think you might like them.
So Gaye and me went round to the office. Jake already had a contract of about 2 pages and signed it there and then, single, on Stiff Records. We'd only done about 5 gigs.
They wanted the now music for now people.
I had no problem with Stiff Records. Even when I thought I was being done over, you know, I could see the point of it. For example, the cover of one called Wonders. They put Barney Bubbles on to design the cover, and when we got invited into Stiff to see what he'd done, well, I felt I'd been stiffed, but what can you say? It was a brilliant cover. They created an icon out of Gaye, and they put the Adverts firmly in punk rock history. There's no question that cover, which I would definitely not have agreed to, was a massive step forward for the band.
Right, because here comes the Adverts. Your soul alive. I wonder how we'll answer when you say we don't like you, go away, come back when you've learned to
play. One Chord Wonders was the best debut single the Adverts could have released, and also the most self-defeating, because it gave the critics a big stick to beat them with.
It's quite ironic, really, because they're getting slagged off for something which they're actually making a critique of. He's actually a very sophisticated songwriter, but he hasn't got a band that can play the songs to the level he can think of in his head. But to me, that's part of the charm of the Adverts.
If you listen to Eddie Van Halen, one of the things that's always baffled me about his playing is that it is completely incoherent emotionally. Makes no sense at all. It's just notes. Whereas the playing in the Adverts records, it may be blind, but it's completely coherent.
The fact that everyone in the band was pushing up to the edge of their ability was what gave it its kind of edge. The feeling that it could fall apart at any moment. Sometimes it did fall apart. So what?
I first met Michael Dempsey when he was the director of Granada Publishing. He was the youngest managing director of a publishing company in Britain, in fact. He was rather sort of famous as being a sort of young hotshot in publishing. And then he had a spectacular party, apparently, at the Frankfurt Book Fair, which cost Granada so much money they just had to get rid of him. I had been to one of these clubs and met the Adverts. I think it was the Adverts in the Down were on that evening. And I took the Adverts back to a drinking club called Zanzibar in Covent Garden. And I ran into Dempsey there at the bar, and we got talking and I introduced them, and I was telling him that this is the new thing, you should get involved, Michael. In fact, and as a joke, I said, you should manage them. They need a manager, because they were looking around for someone to manage them. And literally about a week later, I had a phone call from Dempsey saying, what sort of van should I buy?
I think Michael identified the artist in Tim. You know, this was a really strong performer, strong songwriter. And Michael liked that. Michael would never have just gone with a band who might make him 5,000 quid in a year. He was interested in stuff that inspired him, and he was a TV Smith fan and an Adverts fan. You know, that's what Michael was.
When Chord Wonders came out, you know, it didn't go anywhere near the charts, so we could get rid of our jobs and be on top of the pops. That would take some time. Only about 3 months, as it turned out. But then that was, you know, almost wholly because of Michael Dempsey, who took us out of Stiff, negotiated with us to be on the Live at the Roxy album, and then set us a deal with Anchor Records, who were owned by a major, who had a publicity machine, who knew how to get a record distributed and in the charts, and how to get us in the music press. And that was the point about Michael Dempsey. He didn't try and influence musically. What he did was put what we'd done onto some kind of setting that made sense in the commercial music business.
So who writes all the lyrics?
Tim.
At the moment, yeah. Looking Through Gary Gilmore's Eyes has just come out, is it?
Yeah, it came out last Friday.
That was one of Tim's songs.
Yeah.
What are the lyrics actually about?
It's about a guy in the States who has got the part of the eyes of Gary Gilmore.
No, it's about a guy who's a mass murderer and was convicted to life in prison.
That's Gary Gilmore, the song's about his bleeding eyes.
It was the wish of Gary Gilmore that others benefit from his death. Medically, that was accomplished this morning with the removal of the corneas, some organs, bone, and peripheral nerves. All will be used for transplants and research.
I'm lying in the hospital, I'm pinned against a bed. A stethoscope upon my heart, a hand against my head. They're peeling off the bandages, I'm wincing in the light. The nurse is looking anxious and she's quivering with fright. I'm looking through Gary Gilmore's eyes. 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 The doctors are avoiding me, my vision is confused. I listen to my earphones and I catch the evening news. A murder has been killed and he donates his sight to science. I'm looked into a private ward, I realise that I'm a...
Just like any band has a big hit, it's always a song that doesn't really represent what they're about. I mean, Gary Gilmore's Eyes, it's nothing like the rest of the stuff he ever writes, it's just kind of a weird one-off. So that makes you really, really stuck, doesn't it? It's weird. Your hit can actually be a cross to bear.
I smash the light in anger, push my bed against the door. I close my lids across the eyes, I wish to see no more. The eye receives the messages and sends them to the brain. No guarantee the stimuli must be perceived the same way.
We played at the Roxy, we'd had a single on Stiff Records, we'd been on Live at the Roxy with a live version of All Teenagers. We toured with The Damned, we had a big record company now who knew how to do things. It just seemed everything was rolling right. I don't think anyone was really surprised when it was a hit.
Gary don't need his eyes to see. Gary and his eyes have parted company.
It happened so fast, it took a bit of time to sink in that actually was happening. And by the time it did sink in and it was actually happening, it was all over.
The fact that the Adverts that were actually for about 6 months were a pop band seems actually amazing. I mean, they actually did appear in whatever equivalent smash hits was at the time, and especially with Gaye, no matter how much she actually hates this. I mean, yeah, she looked like really sexy and everything, but she also looked really, really cool, and she was a really fantastic female icon as well because she looked really tough.
She was the rock icon. Everybody wanted to look like her. And she was unique because everything she did, she just did on her own. Nobody told her what to wear. She just picked it up herself. It was such a great image.
I absolutely hated the way that the press would single me out. But I didn't actually want to be a female. I wanted to be a male in the band. Was, you know, because all the bands I really liked and wanted to be like were all males, and I just didn't like the fact I was female, and I certainly didn't want it brought up endlessly and, you know, remarked on.
I think she was embarrassed about being a sex icon. She was a very, very shy girl, cursed by being photogenic. And so she was one of the faces of punk rock. She had the look, you know, she had a certain diffidence that could be construed as insolence. Was she a great musician? No. Was she any worse than Paul Simonon or Glenn Matlock as a bass player at that time? probably wasn't much in it, was there? You know, it's just that she was a girl, so of course she couldn't play it.
Okay, they had this great face, but she couldn't play, and so what? You know, I mean, maybe the fact that Gaye was so good looking worked against the band in the long run. It allowed people to say, oh yeah, that was the band with that really great looking chick, right?
I think Tim was just resigned to it, considering that he was the front person and the songwriter and everything.
People did recognise it to a certain extent for his lyrics and his songs, but he just wasn't recognised enough. And he was also competing in a time that a lot of very good lyricists were around. You know, he wasn't the only great lyricist. I mean, Johnny Rotten was great, you know, Strummer was great, Howard Devoto was great, you know. But Howard Devoto presented himself as a literate punk intellectual, whereas T.V. Smith didn't. I don't remember reading many interviews where T.V. Smith would play the part of the punk rock poet laureate or the rock and roll intellectual, you know, he just wanted free of all these kind of labels. That's how he seemed like to me.
I think Tim's lyrics have a strong element of poetry in them. But he was working in an area which definitely has its roots way back in 60s music. I mean, I don't really even see him as a punk songwriter at all.
He couldn't attend, so he couldn't survive. Something had to give, the people took it down. He was sliding to the gloom, into the dark recesses of their mind.
He had a really adventurous sense of song structure. The choruses in the Adverts songs, they don't come when you expect them to, and they don't necessarily do what choruses are supposed to do. The Great British Mistake is more like an essay than it is a song, and yet when it's played and sung, the melody just makes sense of everything.
I think Great British Mistake was a good example of a classic T.V. Smith song, in that there's a lot of disconnected images that just fly. And if you look at it on paper, it's like, well, what's this about? But when you actually hear it and it's just spitting out at you, you get a very clear picture in a way of what it was like to be in England in 1977.
I swear, String out the gypsy, they're losing their world. They're losing the hard boys and magazine girls. Advert illegal, TV is example, more in the spell. See the books burn, they'll be one by one. They speak against things and against each other. All on a pre-pack, into the fear, into themselves. They're the Great British Mistake. They have to cut their tongues out and take it out somehow. They'll blame it all on something, the British mistake. When will it be over? How can they avoid it?
Exhaustion, boredom, anxiety, self-disgust, misery, sense of inferiority, dislike of industry, dislike of instant pudding, 25-year itch, fear, insecurity, frustration.
What can we do about it?
I haven't the faintest idea.
Great British mistake. Great British mistake.
There's two ways of recording. You either build it all with blocks and hone each block to its correct shape and put it all together, or you take a photograph of what's happening with the band. And the way I made the Adverts record was to kind of take a photograph of what was going on.
This is a great manifesto. That album title, that album cover. Punk is this movement of escape and liberation. T.V. Smith, I'm Moses. We're the chosen people. I mean, the pompousness of it all makes it into a great joke and satirizes the pretensions of punk and all subcultures. At the same time, it's completely serious. Yes, we will lead you out of bondage. We will take you into the promised land. And then you have this billboard. Land of milk and honey. Think, oh my God, this is it?
That's short, don't make a mess of it. Too into the earth, you look for sense in it. No chances, no plans. I smash the windows of a box. I'll be a madman. So time to be 21. To be anyone.
The
guitarist job was the end for the original lineup of the band. Almost certainly the fact that I was in a relationship with Gaye changed the balance between us two and the other two in the band. Laurie in particular had a lot of problems with the fact that us two were really kind of the heads of the band, but that's simply the way the band started.
I think it started to go downhill when, like, me being on the cover of the record.
It was all focused on her, what she needed, what she wanted. It was never about the band itself.
You know, if there's any articles and there's more pictures of me and then he'd have a go, and well, it's not my fault, you know, I didn't want it in the first place, and that used to really piss me off.
But I knew that she would stay and I'd end up going one way or another, whether I left myself or when I got thrown out, and that's what would have happened.
I was a bit hazy about how Rory was actually sacked. He went down with hepatitis while we were in Ireland, and it had to be hospitalised.
So that's what happened. I went straight into the hospital, and that was the last I saw the Adverts.
While he was recovering, we got in John Tower, and it was like a breath of fresh air in the band, you know. All that bad feeling was gone, we were enjoying ourselves, and in some ways, I mean, I guess it was a fairly unpleasant and unfriendly decision, but I would have given the band another couple of months maximum without having made that decision, and there would certainly be no second album.
We were very young, quite volatile possibly. I mean, the music we liked was quite violent in a sense, so unless you really get on with somebody, then it's going to put a strain on any relationship.
I liked him a lot, and I had a lot of respect for him too, and I respected him in more ways than he knew. I just don't think Tim realised that once that part of the sound that the Adverts had gone, that it would ever be the same again.
Uncharted wrecks of wonder, in deepest gloom down under, the drowning men are drawing near. We're subterranean vandals, tying airlines round door handles. Adventurers don't venture here. We're the drowning men. We're the drowning men.
I was just sort of wandering around doing lots of gigs and with other bands, and I was rehearsing in the studio one night, and Robert Crash, the bass player with the Maniacs, just happened to tell me that the Adverts were looking for a drummer.
Ambition stunted, the future fated.
I heard about the Adverts and I heard a lot of the stuff, and to be honest, it sounded quite a weird expression of punk rock. The sort of area where I come from was a lot more technical than Laurie. I had to relearn drums in a way to play like Laurie to start with, but then when the band wanted to progress, then of course it moved on into different areas.
Tim had written 10 songs that fit seamlessly into the Adverts live set, including Male Assault, Fate of Criminals. Even My Place live wasn't that much of a stretch, and at some point he decided to record a very different album.
I was exploring classical music at the time, so I saw the initial punk movement as a complete nightmare. I mean, I'm afraid I reacted a bit like old people reacted to rock and roll in my day. I was dragged by Dempsey to a gig in Oxford, and it was seeing and becoming involved with the Adverts that made me recognise that punk was, in fact, a beautifully valid folk music and social commentary. The lyrics were staggeringly beautiful, and I suddenly started to see maybe a way where you could have the raw frontispiece, if you like, and then introduce a bridge between the band and an almost Wagnerian classical background, which I did via Tim Cross, a brilliant multi-aid instrumentalist, but also an arranger.
I mean, it wasn't very complicated music, and so, you know, you could do it in octaves or you could do it in chord, and I, you know, got a fairly strong style of my own in a way, and so I just applied my most pompous style to his music.
We're being deserted or let loose. I've just seen the dead walk by and it don't seem
I got the impression they wanted a bit of a gothic album anyway, and so that meant large production. And so not only the keyboard's very prominent, but also there's tons and tons of vocals. I think it would be fairly unusual for me not to have put my oar in when it comes to like piling on vocals.
There's an element of that Phil Spector sound, that wall of sound thing that I still hanker after a bit, you know.
They had a female choir thing in the back. It worked fine, but it didn't sound like the Adverts.
Another close down, another let down, another breakdown. So wind down, we're just echoes, we're reflected. Turn us to the screen, another picture's on it.
Yeah, I was really happy with it, but it was too complex and confusing really for the abilities of the band, me included. But I never apologise for something like that because it gives it its character and it gives it its sound. And it's much better to try to reach for something you can't attain than to not bother.
You're living in other people's lives.
The Cast of Thousands artwork started from a great idea, which was a Tibetan monk or something like that who'd set himself on fire as a protest, and that was going to be on the front cover.
But they wouldn't let us have that. They said that all was won't stock it and all that, and so...
They were going to take us into this darkened studio, pose us in front of this good photographer.
And they put on tons of like eyeliner on us, but they were going to have this wonderful effect.
By the time we finish with it, it'll look fine.
Came up with the pictures, a few weeks later, and there we are looking like a dolled up bunch of tarts sitting in a bright studio. And they said, there's your album cover.
Absolutely horrible. That's a horrible glam band.
RCA weren't in a hurry to understand the point of TV, nor how to promote him as best as possible, or basically they did him no favours.
We thought they didn't get what we were doing, and they thought we weren't playing their game, both of which were true.
Good night.
So two things were clear about Cast of Thousands. One was that it was a great leap forward, one was that it wasn't going to go anywhere.
All the human torches catching fire. The corrupt officials getting caught. Poor and the needy, robbers and killers.
Although we knew we were going left field with this album, the sound and construction and the songs were so strange, I thought it was enough for people to see, just a minute, the Adverts weren't this one-dimensional punk band, look what they've done now, this is amazing. I really thought, I was convinced that people were going to really like that album.
It is, to this day, one of the more curious sophomore efforts I've ever heard by any band.
He had spent almost 3 years playing what could be defined as punk rock, and then to come out with an album that defiantly wasn't. I think he moved too quickly.
They were really pursuing a grand vision, on that record especially. And it holds up, I think. In some ways, I like it more than the first record. I like the first record a lot, but the second one has a certain nutrition value that keeps me coming back.
If I was to make a list of the albums, all the albums I've produced, it would be in the top 3 of the ones that I'm proudest of.
TV was hearing something else, maybe he was one of the only guys cynical and brave enough to go, you know what? I'm on to the next thing. If you don't like it, bite me. And that's maybe what everyone did. They went, okay.
He was stuck, but he was stuck by his own choosing, because as an artist, and this is what you have to really respect and admire for, he just ploughed on in this direction, completely ignoring everybody else.
If you align yourself with something, you're kind of stuck with that from the beginning. The Adverts align themselves with outside of them.
I think Howard had just had enough, and I know that we'd been sort of maybe plugging away and not doing as well as he would have thought, and he was a bit disenchanted with it. But we had a rehearsal booked in one day and he just didn't turn up. We never saw him again, ever.
I was quite pleased actually, because I just thought he could do better. He was always talking about Phil Collins, and he always wanted to be that kind of thing. So I used to think, what's that got to do with punk? I think he thought that punk was the wrong road. He took the wrong road.
I will walk you home. I'll make sure
You had to be quite strong in that world. I'm not sure Howard was. And I felt sorry for T.V. Smith because he really was keeping it all together. You know, a bit like Mick Jagger keeps the Stones together. He was the one.
It was a sinking ship then, see? And I was still there, ready. You know, but there comes a breaking point. And in the end, I didn't bother to go in. And then a few weeks after that, so I got a phone call from somebody telling me that T.V. Smith had split the Adverts.
It was a horrible mess. So we got in these brothers, and actually we found ourselves with quite a viable band. It was sounding very good very quickly after rehearsals. Then we went out on tour, and the whole breakdown started happening again. I mean, there was huge arguments between Tim Cross and the Martinez brothers, so I found myself with a whole new bunch of people, but with the same old arguments. It was just like this recurring nightmare. The album was vilified, people hated us, our audiences were going down, we didn't have a label and we hated each other, you know. It was obvious this thing is not going to go any further.
There were other tensions, you know, because I think Michael Dempsey, their manager, his obvious loyalty was with Tim because he saw Tim as the one with the talent. So he would necessarily be exasperated with Gaye because she was in a state that she wasn't ready.
Gaye, for God's sake, don't think we're going off.
Right. She was drinking a lot and she was fairly confused a lot of the time.
What a vodka a day. I would have a nice healthy breakfast, nice bowl of cereal though, but that was the rest of the day. Just drink vodka.
The punk press, even NME, Sounds, you name it, there was every bit as chauvinistic and fascist as any other press, and so they'd go on about a way, you know, I mean, very, very personal stuff. They wouldn't say that to anybody else.
I'm sure it was damaging her self-confidence and making her more difficult to deal with. You know, she became quite a difficult person to be in a band with.
Tim was very stoic. He simply understood that this is what happens when you put a person like this under these sort of pressures. And he was incredibly patient, where she'd be falling over and not getting her stuff together. And because of the nature I met her, and I couldn't understand why he was so loyal, because I'd never been that loyal to anybody myself. And I asked him, and he just shrugged and looked like it was a stupid question, and which taught me a lesson or two, you know.
I can't say whether our relationship was under threat or not, but we always felt that having got through that, we could get through anything.
I think when the band split it up, there was a certain amount of relief because it let Gaye off the hook. She'd had enough. I think she realised that she wanted time for herself, and there was a feeling that he needed to move on, TV needed to move on, and get more accomplished musicians in because his songs were developing, and there was only so far that the Adverts could develop. You're looking ahead all the time. We've done that. And it was successful up to a point, but what's the next big project?
The revival of CND and of pacifist movements elsewhere in Europe began after 5 of America's NATO partners, including Britain, agreed to consider sighting nuclear cruise missiles at American bases in Europe by 1983.
He's back on track here. I think with the Adverts' second album, which I do like, he's getting all this experimentation out of his system. And he's not on a setup to get it done right. You know, he hasn't got the right band, he hasn't got the right producers, he's not the right studio, he's not the right label. But when he gets exposed, it's because he's in a touring band. It makes a real difference because these are songs that are played hard on the road for a long time, but people really want to play them.
Tomahawk Cruise is one of his finest and best songs, and I can remember the first time I heard that on Peel, and I just thought, wow, because it was just as the missiles were coming in.
If they had recorded the whole album with Tom Newman, it would have been as good as the first Adverts album.
It's one of the great songs of that period. It did get quite good press, that single, as well, but again, he's on a small label. He's a really deeply unfashionable person by now. He's so far out of limb that most people completely ignore it. It's quite a tragedy, really, isn't it?
I will not be a party to telling the younger generation that the future for them lies in an inevitable nuclear confrontation with the Soviet Union.
They lost Tom Newman as a producer. That was the first thing that went wrong. The second thing that went wrong was when the album was out, they landed a tour opening for the Undertones. British tour, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, I think it was. After 2 nights, they were dropped from the tour. And that was where the impetus was lost, because suddenly they were scrabbling for gigs. Oh, and can I say that Last Word had the second worst album cover of Tim's career? And you have Ralph Steadman do the sleeve for Tomahawk Cruise. So who should we use for the album? Edward Bell, who has painted one picture in his life, and because it was for David Bowie, everybody's queuing up to use him.
That was Michael's idea, and perhaps that was one of his least good ideas.
You know, he stuck with Dempsey when really you would have been better advised to get someone else or move on.
We almost had a kind of little coup at one point, didn't we? I can't remember why. We all felt, the band felt, that Tim really could do so much better without Michael.
I wasn't a huge admirer of Dempsey. You know, he obviously was very bright and he got Tim started and he got us our record deal. So, you know, you can't take that away from him. But as a manager, he was pretty erratic, always sort of trying to pull a fast one, bouncing checks. Remember that one, the famous one, a company check will be all right, will it, as we're leaving the hotel? And you just, you didn't want to look as he wrote it out. That last German tour was a pretty terrible experience. Yeah. The bouncing checks finally caught up with us and the PA firm just left halfway through the tour.
Yeah. We were getting no income from the gigs. The promoter was losing money. We were getting paid nothing. It was very depressing.
There was so much potential there. I mean, that band was sparking with energy, and everything went against them. And the bad luck that attended the Explorers, I think, continued to haunt him for another couple of years.
Yeah, Michael's death was very difficult to take because, of course, Michael was and had continued to be a very close friend of mine, someone who I respected and admired a great deal, who was having enormous financial difficulties just keeping things going, trying to support my career after the Adverts finished, and generally being a dynamic kind of live wire manager who would try and get things going and get interest in the next project.
He may have had a lot of bad ideas, and I'm sure people could sit there and say, well, he shouldn't have done this, he shouldn't have done that, but his faith in TV was unshakable.
Yeah, they loved each other, and Michael understood Steve, and he did his best to represent him, and he was very loyal, and that's something that TV needed and has not had since.
I did look for managers, but I never found anyone I trusted, and there weren't that many options, to be honest. You're looking at a failed artist. The Explorers album had flopped, the second Adverts album had flopped. Not many managers were interested in taking on that unless they were real lovers of the music like Michael was. And I didn't meet anyone like that. Through some connection or other, I heard about this label called Rondelay. One of the guys on Rondelay was setting up this sub-label called Expulsion on a very, very low budget, and said he'd be interested in another album from me. And I don't know what he was expecting. Probably he was expecting that I was going to bung out an Adverts type album, because Rondelay was pretty much punk and that kind of feel. I was having a very creative writing period working with Tim Cross and Tim Rennick. It was much more poppy. I kind of didn't want to get involved with the punk sounding stuff. I felt that was now behind me. So I was writing simple kind of pop songs with interesting lyrics, and I was very happy with the stuff I was writing.
It's pop songs and they are so twisted. You could imagine them all being huge hits until you actually listen to them. I mean, even Your Haunted Heart, which is such a sweet, lovely song, but would you really want it written about you?
We got basically a no advance kind of deal from Expulsion, but they were willing to put up very low studio costs. I think they gave us something like 900 quid or something to find a studio and record. Admittedly, we didn't have a bass player and drummer, but we didn't have the budget for bass player and drummer, so let's not worry about that, let's just do it. If we wait for the budget and we wait for the people, then we could wait forever. So Tim and I went into a small, cheap studio in South London and put together Channel 5.
Picture her widening eyes. Now you have all of me. Surprise! Surprise! It's just a token of my love.
I have a really soft spot for that album. I know it's difficult to listen to. I know you put it on and it sounds like some awful 80s record, but if you give it 5 or 10 listens, it gets under your skin.
I'd snap up anything I could find of T.V. Smith, and a lot of people I knew didn't even get Cast of Thousands, and they never even got to the solo stuff. I'm like the only person I know, besides maybe you, who has the Channel 5 album.
If I thought it was difficult to get hold of Cast of Thousands, trying to get hold of Channel 5 proved impossible because it wasn't actually really released, was it? I mean, it didn't actually really come out, did it? Or it didn't? Expulsion became bankrupt 2 weeks after the record's release, I think, and all the records were left on the shelf in the factory and weren't able to get out to shops.
It was a very typical early 80s UK indie. It existed for a little less than it needed to, and then went under. And the first you knew it had gone under was when you called and there was nobody there.
It's one of those things where you think you're back on your feet and the next thing you know, you've been knocked back on your ass. And that's the way life is. You get back up again.
To have over 3 million people unemployed in this country is bad enough. But to suggest, as some of our opponents have, that we don't care about it is as deeply wounding as it is utterly false.
The 80s were the most difficult period of my life. If I thought I was beyond redemption in the music business after The Explorers, after Channel 5 came out, then there was no way, I was going to get a record company interested in me. No manager, no publisher, no record deal, no tour agent, no money. I went on the dole for 10 years.
The early 80s were not a good time for people who were known from punk to be trying to get a new deal.
I got one A&R meeting, I think, where in as many words the guy told me, give up.
Of course, as comes to all of us, unless you're very lucky or you've got the right PR people and you pay them the right amount of money, having been flavour of the month or part of a movement which was respected, you're then regarded as being sort of old hat. So he was sort of left a bit by the wayside.
He said he was thinking of giving it all up on his 30th birthday.
I couldn't give up. Maybe it would have been the easy way out for me to just think I'm not going to make it as a musician, but I couldn't. I was still writing songs. I had to write songs, and the writing that I was doing through the 80s is easily the equal of anything on Channel 5. If Channel 5 was a lost album, then there's at least another 2 lost albums that really, really should have been recorded in that period. It would have been nice to get into a studio and record them properly and get them out on record, but it wasn't to be. And at the end of the 80s, what I missed was playing in front of people, was seeing people in front of me enjoying what I was doing.
Seems like a safe place, way out of reach.
Well, I was sitting at home one day, mid-80s, and the phone rang, and it was Tim. He said, I'm putting a new band together, do you want to be in it? I said, yeah, all right then. I was absolutely gobsmacked.
Plan was rehearse in cheap rehearsal rooms. We could fit all the band and all our gear into 2 cars. We'd sleep on the floor. As long as we got paid our petrol money, we could do it. So this was a non-profit band, that I could keep up while I was still on the dole. I couldn't afford to come off the dole. It had to work that way. We'd just go off and do charity gigs. We'd do benefit gigs or save whatever's worth saving, benefit gigs, getting back in front of a live audience, even if it was only for 5 people, back to some kind of value of what it was about being in a band.
We had a lot of fun, but we worked very hard. Yeah, and he was just determined to be forward-looking. The rest of the band would have done it for nothing. We loved that band. And in fact, it paid its way. It never cost us anything. But I think he was getting fed up with just like kind of struggling.
I had a pretty sound idea of what the music business was like by then, you know, so I didn't have any illusions that suddenly they were going to be flocking to our doors. What I was surprised with was the kind of vindictiveness of some of the critics. It was, oh, look at TV Smith, he's now playing back rooms at pubs. You know, what a loser. Excuse me. Excuse me for being a loser.
I think also at that time he was probably very frustrated about the album not coming out. He actually funded the whole album himself. And I think we spent 3 weeks recording it and then doing the cover and getting Ludo to do all the cartoon book and all the rest of it. So a completely finished project. And he couldn't get any distribution for it at all. It wasn't until after the band had finished before the album actually came out in the end.
Almost accidentally, we put ourselves in a position where we had to interact with the music business again. And what do you know, the music business said no. So the writing was then on the wall for cheap.
See Cheap at the Bull and Gate, and there was hardly anyone there, and there he was with his top hat, banging out these great songs with this sort of like band, like a load of old bikers, and there was no one there, and I was thinking, this is really ridiculous, you know, what a talented songwriter, why is there no one there, this is stupid. I said to him, Tim, you know, you've got all these great songs and you can play the guitar reasonably well, why don't you just go out there solo?
I've never played solo, I don't know how to do it, I'll be rubbish. And he said, I'm booking this acoustic gig in North London, there's no PA, you just stand there with the guitar, you play, you know, to 20 people, like 5 rows of seats, and why don't you do it? Give it a go. So I gave it a go, and I was thrilled. I got something back off that gig that I hadn't got off gigs, I don't think, ever before. Direct communication between me and the audience, and I got addicted to it. It gave me freedom of how I could write, and a very important thing was that it gave me freedom of how I could tour. I could pick up my guitar, I could get on a train, and there were no expenses apart from that. Suddenly the whole live aspect opened up again.
It's not science, it's a march of the giants.
I knew the first time I went to Germany, for example, that there were not going to be many people who knew who I was there. I wasn't expecting to go and play for 500 people, you know, I was expecting to go and play for 20 or 30 people, which is what happened. But what I saw was 20 or 30 people in those gigs who really liked what I was doing. And sure enough, the next time I went and toured, there were a few more people, and the next time there were a few more.
Registering on and on may be the first test tube I don't, but I don't know, I can't hear myself think over the click of the Geiger counter and the roar of the motorway link.
He just couldn't tour like he does with a band, and it's the only way he can actually make a living is just go out there on his own and guitar in one hand and bag and hutch in the other, and just sets off down the road, and that's it.
I never thought I would end up travelling the world and enjoying it, but it's now incredibly vital to my life and my experience. It's really been important for me in the way I look at the world and my understanding of people from all the people I meet. I couldn't give that up now, and I certainly didn't plan it. I never thought I would be doing it, and somehow this has happened, and I think, you know, there's something to be said about the fact that if you don't find your own destiny comes to find you.
I wake up tired and they say, what's the plan with you? What's
with the manager, you never really know, you know. You never know what are those studio costs, where are we going to end up recording, what are the dates going to be. So, I mean, I have all that, you know, under my control, and I like that. You know, as a one-man outfit, it's not just about writing the songs. The whole satisfaction and the whole, almost the creative process now extends out into the touring and everything, you know. It's all part of the deal somehow. The con is that I'm totally overworked, you know, and I don't have any free time. You know, I'd like to have some free time. I'd like to have more time to write. I'd like to have more time to record, you know, and just take a break and, you know, clear out my head and come back to it with fresh energy. And that's actually not possible when I'm doing everything myself. But the pros outweigh the cons.
He could be more successful, but he's got a very loyal, very devoted audience that adores him. Whereas, as we saw with the Adverts, I mean, they had a huge audience which turned their backs the moment they didn't make a record that sounded like Gary Gilmore's Eyes. You know, now each solo album sounds a little bit different to the last, and his audience just keeps growing a little bit more for each one.
There is an incredible satisfaction gained from being able to earn a living doing what you love when you've been virtually ignored by the kind of opinion formers of the day.
And it's real, you know, this is not something that's been invented by, you know, a record company or a promo agency through hype, and it's a real communication going on between me and the people who like my stuff, you know. And the reason they come is because they like what I do. It's not because they've seen some video on MTV and they think, wow, that looks pretty successful, I better go and buy into that. You know, they're not buying into my lifestyle, you know, or what they perceive as me as a star. They're all they're doing is they're enjoying my songs and my outlook on life, and they feel close to me, and I feel close to them.
Let the good times roll into a bottomless hole. Job, friends, and future. My ideal home furniture. Let the trumpet sound as my house falls down. When the dust begins to clear, I'm lying on the ground, and I'm standing on a path in an unknown part of town. Well, the path leads me away over hills and out of sight, in the blazing sun by day and a hanging moon by night. When I wind up in a place where I never have to count, and I never see the waves, cause I push my leg keep falling out. It's expensive being poor, because everything hurts more. Knocking on a bolted door, it's expensive being poor. Someone throw me down some crumbs, or we'll eat them off the floor. It's expensive being poor. I look good when I get desperate. 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 The edge of a revolution, that's exactly where we stand. And though we could seize the moment, we aspire to wear the brand. And we take our place in a profane state with a common herd for beauty.